for this presentation.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk today. So I just wanted to go over how we've changed our major hemorrhage reviews recently within Western Sussex Hospital Trust. Obviously, we've merged with Brighton in April, so that makes us University Hospital Sussex. But at present, this presentation only relates to Western because we're still going through the merger process. So here are my unusual facts. Oh, sorry, I just need to click up. Sorry, thanks for waiting. So because we've merged with Brighton, I wanted to give an unusual fact about all three cities, just to kind of break the ice. So my interesting fact about Brighton is the only reason that the Royal Pavilion is still standing and has escaped bombing during 2 world wars is the fact that Hitler was so taken with its architecture that he wanted it as a summer house. Thankfully, that never happened. Worthing as a city has hosted a number of world records that have been broken, and the most notable is that the largest fig ever grown was here by a gentleman named Lloyd Cole, and it weighed a whopping 295 grams. And if anyone who wants a comparison, that's the same weight as a can of Weight Watchers chicken soup. And as for Chichester, where St Richard's is based, Boxgrove in the 90s, they unearthed the oldest hominid remains, and they dated it as a thigh bone from a male 500,000 years old. And that being the longest, the oldest remains found today. We possibly still would have attempted to have done a hip hop on him as well. So our team, I'm really sorry I didn't put any pictures in, but our team here at Western, we are headed up by our chief, Zoe Summit. Trevor Deetleafs looks after the Worthing site, whilst I look after the St Richard's site as the seniors. We have a senior MLA, Adam Holloway, who looks after our MLA teams on both sites. A fantastic job. And then we have a wonderful transfusion practitioner team headed up by the infamous Ruth O'Donnell, with Rachel Holmes, who looks after the Worthing site, and Tim Williams, who looks after the St Richard's site primarily. See, there's a slight amount of change in between sites. So this wonderful lady is Dr. Kerry Ashpole, and she is a consultant anaesthetist at St Richard's Hospital. And our major hemorrhage, this entire presentation actually is pretty much down to her. So at St Richard's, for a number of years, we had a major obstetric hemorrhage bleep and protocol, which was really well practiced. But we didn't have a major hemorrhage bleep, unlike our Worthing counterparts. So Dr. Ashpole headed up a team who created a major hemorrhage protocol for the St Richard's site, accompanied with a bleep. And this went live in 2018. Worthing had had theirs in place since 2010. So they were almost our gold standard to look to. So when we brought this in 2018, obviously there was a lot of training that went around it, a lot of input into the protocol itself. And once it went live, we did what any transfusion team would do, is we audited it on an annual basis to see how effective it was. And Dr. Ashpole is not the kind of person you say no to. And she is also wonderful. She has a massive passion for transfusion. So she requested that we performed an audit after a year to see how it was working. We were meeting regularly to review the major hemorrhages that were happening, not the obstetric hemorrhages, just the major hemorrhages, to check that we were meeting KPIs, blood was being delivered in a timely fashion, also the emergency blood, which emergency blood was being taken, because as with any new protocol that you institute in the trust, it just takes a while to get going. So we were collecting data and auditing this on an annual basis. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I did this last minute every time I was asked to. And it was an annual review, even though at St Richard's we didn't have a huge amount of data, but it was a huge task. So to look at all of the major hemorrhages, so for each major hemorrhage we complete a record within the lab, just to keep some information for us. And also it also has always worked as a little bit of a timeline and a prompt for our biomeds. So I would look at every single one of these major hemorrhage records that we upload onto our quality management system. Then I would scrutinise our IT system just to gather some more information on the patient to make sure that everything that Dr. Ashpole wanted us to do, we met. So to meet all of our KPIs is in providing blood, emergency blood within 10 minutes, getting our full blood count clotting results out in a timely fashion. It just ended up taking quite a while. So I collected all the data and then I would analyse and present it. And after the first year, this was excellent. There weren't very many to compare, but she said, that's great, fantastic. But actually, it's really nice for us to have this data, but it'd be nice to compare it against Worthing's major hemorrhage data because they had been going for a number of years and they had it down to a fine art. So we would compare it against them being our gold standard. So again, went back, reviewed all the records, scrutinised the limbs, collected the data, analysed and presented the data. And we've done this on an annual basis moving forward. And year on year, the amount of data that we collect increases because the Major Haemorrhage Protocol at St Richard's is being more recognised and more taken up. But this has ended up being quite a lot of work just for one person to do. And actually, all the time that I was reviewing all of the records, there was some really interesting questions that were raised, and some of the biomeds were absolutely fantastic at completing a really great timeline. And, you know, and some of them would write their frustrations down. And, you know, so we were getting all of this data, and some of the clinical areas, as we were analysing and presenting, were starting to get interested in the data as well. And there was a doctor who was a trainee doctor at Worthing A&E who wanted to also do an audit on the major hemorrhage protocols within the A&E department. So A&E contacted us, and actually, you know, the whole communication with the clinical area is always really, really important for blood transfusion. So the fact that they were interested and they were listening, and we had some open communications and we were feeding our data back to them, just showed us that actually this data that we were collecting and auditing had some kind of purpose. So how could we tackle it moving forward to make sure that we were still collecting all of this data, but to make it have more of a purpose? And a couple of years ago, I had attended one of these educational days, actually, and Dr. Cassie Lawn, who is a neonatal consultant at Brighton, had presented this wonderful presentation about debriefing after critical incidents or major situations, and the importance of the debrief, which is quite well recognised within the NHS. And one of the other things that I think that we always get forgotten about a little bit in the lab is actually we don't really ever get debrief. We play quite a huge role within major hemorrhages or obstetric hemorrhages, but actually, you know, and they can be quite upsetting at times, but you never really talk to anyone about it afterwards. So I thought, you know, we could collect this data and we could make it more of a review process. And actually, if we were going to actively collect the data, we could review it with the biomeds in a timely fashion. So we were really, really finding out kind of any positives or negatives that had occurred. So they would give us something, to feed back to clinical areas, and also improvements. So we decided that we were going to review what data we wanted collected, and also we were going to amend our major hemorrhage record to make it more user friendly. So the entire transfusion team, we got everyone on board because we were realizing that actually the data that we were collecting and presenting was getting quite a lot of attention from the clinical area. So we could use this to increase our profile throughout the hospital. The wonderful Tim Williams is an IT genius, and he redesigned the form for us to make it more user-friendly. We also made it slightly more aesthetically pleasing, which it made the biomeds happier, no end. But it also meant that as we were collecting our data, everything that we needed was on the form, so there was less limb scrutinising. And one of the biggest things that I've learned. Sorry?
I said I agree with the form.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I'm happy to share as well. And the other big thing we did was we communicated the changes that we were proposing to make to our team, because one thing I've learned in the last year, having recently started performing ONEG audits, and where our ONEG goes, is if you start asking people, oh, how come you use the ONEG instead in this OPOS patient, etc., or and you haven't explained to them why you're doing it, they get really suspicious. So if you're really open and transparent and explain, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it, and we want to make the whole process one part. Actually, we want to hear from you. What went well? What didn't go well? Was there anything that could have gone better? Is there any feedback that you want to? And it gives us a chance to touch base with the biomeds that are involved in this process, as well as allowing us to collect the data. And then once we had the form in place, we'd rolled out all of the training, all of the communications, we set a go live date to start using these forms. Initially as well, the other thing I'd say is make sure that you've got the new forms out and photocopied, otherwise everyone's going to use the old forms. And so the outcomes so far, we only started in July, but it means that actually the transfusion team are performing the reviews. We're trying to do them within 72 hours of the major hemorrhage happening. And all of the data is collected with Biomed and entered onto the spreadsheet at the time. It just gives you an opportunity to sit down and talk to them and just make sure everything was okay. If they've got any questions as well, they can ask, because you always have a range of biomedical scientists with a range of experience that are performing the major hemorrhage protocols. So it just gives them a chance to go, oh, was this okay? Was that okay? And don't get me wrong, 60% of the major hemorrhages we've reviewed so far, there's nothing exciting to say. And that in itself still speaks volumes, because it means that everything is working. We are using our data to get regular feedback with A&E. At Worthing, we've really got it down. We really are trying to get a bridge into the A&E at St Richard's to give us slightly more of communication. It allows us for real-time review, because actually when I was looking at the data annually, there were a lot of questions that would pop into my head, but I couldn't ask anyone because it had happened 6 months ago and they're never going to remember it. So, and it also provides an educational resource. So we have used this as training, and also we fed back to the clinical areas or to the portering team when something's gone really well. So far, scrutinising it, I'm not going to lie, I found one quite big error we could have prevented, but we've also found some absolutely fantastic areas of practice that we've been able to congratulate everyone involved. And thank you so much for listening. I will answer questions, but just to get back to my title, we got to speak to some trainee consultant anaesthetists, and we were feeding back about a major hemorrhage that had gone really well, and the patient had been transferred out to Brighton. He'd been held at St Richard's for longer than necessary because they couldn't stabilise him to transfer. And the patient was Russian, it was really complicated. And we were telling the consultant anaesthetist about this, and one of them piped up and said, oh, I was there that night. And luckily, it's really sad because the patient didn't speak any English. There was a Russian doctor that was on that said to him in Russian, tonight is not your night to die, my friend. But thanks for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions.